"You're going to bed with me tonight," the mountain woman ordered the cowboy. The fire crackled in the mountain cabin, throwing shadows across the rough-hewn logs and the heavy wooden beams overhead. The wind outside roared like a living beast, clawing against the shutters, rattling the roof, and sending the snow in furious sheets down the slope. Inside, the room was warm but tense, the kind of tension that lives not in silence, but in the words unspoken. She stood before him, tall, fierce, and unbending. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that had looked into storms, into danger, into hunger and loss, and never wavered. Her voice had been steady, but laced with fire when she had spoken the words, "You're going to bed with me tonight." It wasn't a question, it wasn't a plea, it was an order carved out of necessity, pride, and something deeper, something she would never admit aloud. The cowboy didn't move at first. He was a man of the plains, not these mountains, but his frame was just as unyielding as hers. His hat hung low over his brow, his jaw rough with days of stubble, and his hands, still dusted with the frost from bringing in the wood, tightened just slightly at her demand. He had faced outlaws with rifles, wild stallions with teeth and hooves, and men who carried grudges like they carried their whiskey, but this woman, this mountain woman, was different. She was not asking for shelter. She was declaring war and truce in the same breath. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice low, gravelly from smoke and cold air. Her stare didn't flinch. "Because the mountain kills the weak, cowboy. It doesn't care about pride or loneliness. Out here, a body grows cold faster than you think. And if you want to see the sun rise, you'll do as I say." The words hung heavy between them, not just for survival's sake. The air itself was laced with something raw, older, almost primal. She wasn't just talking about warmth. She was talking about trust, about surrender, about binding herself to a stranger in the one place she allowed no weakness, her own bed. He took off his hat, set it down on the table beside the lantern, and met her gaze fully. "And if I say no?" Her lips curved into something between a smirk and a challenge. "Then you'll freeze on that floor, and I'll still sleep well." "But I don't think you're that much of a fool." The cowboy studied her in the flicker of the firelight. She was no girl of the towns, painted up with soft hands and softer words. Her hair, dark and wild, was braided loosely, strands escaping like the mountain itself could never tame her. Her shoulders were broad, strong from splitting wood, carrying water, fighting off wolves or worse. And her eyes carried a solitude that made his chest ache in a way he didn't expect. Without another word, he kicked off his boots, unbuckled his gun belt, and laid it across the chair. She didn't thank him. She didn't move. She only turned, walked toward the small bedroom, and left the door open behind her. The cowboy hesitated for a breath, then followed. The bed was made of pine, rough but sturdy, covered in thick furs and quilts stitched by hands that knew both labor and patience. She was already there, sitting upright, watching him with the same unyielding gaze. "You've fought storms before," she said, softer now, though no less commanding. "But you've never fought this mountain. Tonight it takes more than your strength. It takes mine too." He lowered himself beside her, careful, as though stepping into a world not entirely his. The warmth of her body pressed through the quilts, through the furs, and into him like a fire stoked from deep within. She smelled of pine, of smoke, of earth, not perfume. And yet it was more intoxicating than any whiskey he'd ever known. The silence stretched again, broken only by the howl of the wind outside and the pounding of his own heart. Finally, he whispered, "You don't let many men in here, do you?" Her eyes flickered, softer just for an instant, before the steel returned. "I don't let any." That admission cut deeper than the order itself. He realized then that this night was not just about survival. It was about something unspoken, something she had buried under years of solitude and storms. She had chosen him, not because he was convenient, not because he was strong, but because something in him matched the wildness in her. The storm battered the cabin until dawn, but inside, the warmth grew beyond the fire. They didn't speak much after that. Words weren't needed. The mountain howled, but the mountain woman and the cowboy had already made their stand. By the time the sun pushed its pale light through the storm's wreckage, the fire had burned low, but the warmth between them remained. He opened his eyes, felt her steady breath against his chest, and for the first time in years, he realized he hadn't just survived the night, he had been changed by it. And when she finally stirred, lifting her gaze to meet his, she didn't have to repeat the words. He already knew. Last night had been more than a command. It had been a beginning. The storm outside did not ease with dawn. If anything, it grew louder, throwing itself against the cabin walls as though determined to find a way in. The cowboy had thought the worst was over, but the mountain seemed eager to prove him wrong. He sat up slowly, careful not to disturb her. The woman still slept, one arm draped across his chest, her breath steady. She looked different in sleep, less of the unyielding iron she had shown the night before, more of the flesh and blood woman who lived beneath the armor. For a moment, he wondered how many winters she had survived in this place alone, how many storms she had fought back with her own two hands, how many nights she had faced this silence without anyone beside her. He eased himself from the bed, the boards beneath his boots groaning as though betraying his movement. She stirred but did not wake. The cowboy stepped into the main room, lit the dying coals in the hearth, and began stacking fresh wood. The fire crackled to life again, pushing back the cold shadows. He poured water into a pot and set it over the flames. He had learned long ago on the trail that a man earns his keep where he can. And though this wasn't his cabin, he wasn't about to sit idle. The door creaked behind him. He turned to find her standing there, wrapped in a fur-lined robe, her hair loose now, tumbling down her shoulders in dark waves. She looked at him with that same steady gaze, but there was something else in it this morning, a quiet weighing, as though she were deciding whether to let him stay or drive him out into the storm. "You make yourself at home fast," she said, her voice low, still husky from sleep. He met her eyes. "Figure if I'm gonna be under your roof, I ought to carry my weight." Her lips quirked in the faintest hint of a smile, but she said nothing more. She moved past him, poured herself a cup from the pot as the water began to steam, and stood by the window. Outside, the snow was falling thick, blanketing the trees and the ground in relentless white. "You won't be leaving today," she said finally. He gave a quiet chuckle. Wasn't planning on walking into that storm anyway. Her gaze cut back to him, sharp again, testing. "Some men try. The mountain buries them before they make it a mile. Then I'm not some man." She studied him for a long moment, then turned back to the window. "No, you're not." The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. He sat at the table, watching her. She had returned to that fortress-like presence, but he had glimpsed what lay beneath, if only for a moment. And that glimpse had left him wanting to know more. "What's your name?" he asked finally. She didn't turn. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." The pause was long, then she whispered, "Alara." The name suited her. Strong, uncommon, carrying the echo of something wild and untamed. "And you?" she asked, almost reluctantly. "Calder," he said. "Most just call me Cow." Her lips curved again, faint but genuine this time. "Calder and Alara," she murmured, as though testing how the names sounded together. The storm raged on for hours, but inside the cabin, time began to shift. Alara moved with quiet efficiency, mending a torn quilt, checking the traps she had set near the cabin walls. Calder helped where he could, chopping wood, hauling water, fixing the latch on the door that had come loose in the night. By the second evening, the storm still hadn't broken. The two of them sat by the fire, the cabin filled with the scent of stew simmering on the hearth. The light flickered across Alara's face, softening the edges of her stern expression. "You said last night the mountain kills the weak," Calder said, his voice breaking the silence. How long you been fighting it? Her eyes met his, hard again, but not unkind. Long enough to know it doesn't care who you are. It takes when it wants. He leaned back, studying her. Family. For the first time, he saw her flinch. It was small, almost hidden, but it was there. Once, she said, not anymore. Calder didn't press, though the weight of her words sat heavy between them. He knew loss when he heard it. He'd buried enough of his own on the trail. Friends, brothers in arms, even a woman whose memory still lingered like smoke. Alara's eyes flicked to him, sharp. And you, what drives a man like you into these mountains in the dead of winter? He gave a low laugh, though it held no humor. Chasing something, maybe running from something else. Haven't decided which. Her gaze lingered on him, as though she could see the truth beneath his words, and for once, she didn't demand more. That night, when the fire burned low again and the cold pressed close around the cabin, she spoke the words once more. Not as sharp as before, not as commanding, but still certain, you're going to bed with me tonight. And this time, Calder didn't question. He followed her into the room, not out of necessity, but out of choice. The days stretched into nights, the storm refusing to break. Each day, they worked together, checking the lines, mending, hauling, surviving. Each night, the distance between them grew shorter, until it was gone entirely. Calder began to see the woman beneath the armor, the one who had laughed once, who had known love and loss, who carried scars no less deep than his own. And Alara began to see the man who didn't bend to the mountain, who carried a quiet strength that matched her own solitude. But storms never last forever, and when the snow finally broke, and the mountain lay silent beneath the pale blue sky, Calder knew the real storm was only just beginning. When the blizzard finally surrendered, the silence was deafening. The mountain lay cloaked in white, the trees sagging beneath heavy snow, the world reborn in an unforgiving stillness. Calder stood outside the cabin, his boots crunching against the frozen crust, his breath a ghost in the air. For days he had wondered if he would ever step into light again, and now here it was, cold, bright, merciless. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Alara stepped out, her fur cloak drawn tight, her eyes narrowed against the brilliance. She did not look fragile against the snow. She looked like part of it, unyielding, carved from the mountain itself. The storms passed, Calder said quietly. She nodded. But the mountain doesn't let you leave without a price. Calder studied her face. There was something in her tone, not just caution but memory. He didn't press, not yet. Instead, he shifted his gaze down the trail where the world disappeared into a valley of ice and shadow. Somewhere down there was the life he had left behind. Somewhere down there were debts, blood, and ghosts that still called his name. Alara, he said, turning back to her. Why do you stay here, alone, in this wilderness? Her eyes met his, hard as flint. Because everything I loved died below those mountains. Up here, I don't have to see the graves. I don't have to hear the lies. I don't have to watch the world take until nothing's left. The words hit like iron. Calder felt the truth in them, the weight of a wound that had never healed. And if it tries to take again, he asked. Her jaw tightened. It won't. Not while I breathe. For days after, they moved like two wolves bound by the same trail. They worked side by side, cutting paths through the drifts, hauling water from the frozen creek, resetting the snares buried beneath snow. Nights were spent by the fire, the silence between them now filled with a quiet, unspoken knowing. They shared warmth not from necessity but from a bond forged in storm and solitude. But peace never holds long in places like this. On the fourth morning after the blizzard, Calder spotted it, tracks in the snow. Not deer, not elk, human, heavy boots, pressing deep into the frost, circling wide before cutting toward the cabin. Alara, he called, his voice low, sharp. She joined him, her gaze narrowing as she studied the trail. No words passed between them, but he saw the change in her eyes, the return of the steel, the readiness of someone who had lived too long on the edge of danger. They followed the tracks, moving slow, silent, rifles in hand. A half-mile down the ridge, they found the remains of a campfire, still smoldering beneath the snow. Beside it, scattered tin cans and a strip of torn cloth. Calder picked it up, ran it through his fingers, and felt his gut harden. Outlaws. He knew the kind. Men who hunted weakness, who smelled solitude like blood in the water. Men who left ruin in their wake. Back at the cabin, Alara barred the door, her movements sharp, controlled. "They've found us," she said flatly. Calder set his rifle against the wall. "Not us, me." Her eyes burned into him, demanding the truth. He met them head on. "I wasn't just riding the mountains for peace," he said slowly. "I was running. Men are after me, bad men. I put one of theirs in the ground, and they swore they'd hunt me to the ends of the earth." Her breath came sharp, but she didn't flinch. "And you led them here." The accusation cut deep, but Calder didn't back down. "I didn't mean to, but if they've caught my trail, they'll come. And they won't care about you. They'll burn this place, take what they want, and leave nothing standing." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, thick and dangerous. Then Alara lifted her chin, eyes flashing with a fire that matched the storm. "Then let them come. This is my mountain, Calder. I've buried wolves bigger than them." That night, neither of them slept. They fortified the cabin, stacked wood and water, checked every rifle and round of ammunition. Alara moved with precision, her hands steady, her gaze unshaken. Calder watched her and knew this wasn't the first time she had stood at the edge of war. At dawn, they came. 3 figures, dark against the snow, rifles slung, faces hidden beneath scarves. Calder recognized their gait, the cruel swagger of men who thought themselves untouchable. The first shot cracked the silence, slamming into the cabin door. Calder and Alara dropped low, returning fire through the narrow window slits. The mountain echoed with thunder, snow spraying as bullets bit into the earth. 2 circling left, Alara barked. Calder shifted, his rifle steady, eyes cold. He dropped one with a clean shot, the man tumbling into the drift. The second hesitated, ducking behind a pine. The third laid down cover fire, forcing them back. Alara's jaw tightened. "They want to flush us out. Then we don't give them the chance." She met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the storm between them broke into perfect clarity. They weren't 2 strangers anymore. They were a force, bound not by chance but by fire. Together, they pushed back. Calder covered the left flank while Alara slipped out the back, moving like shadow through the trees. The outlaw behind the pine never saw her coming. Her blade flashed once, swift and silent, and he crumpled into the snow. The last man, realizing his numbers had fallen, broke and ran. Calder lifted his rifle, sighted, then lowered it. Alara stepped beside him, breath sharp in the cold. "Why didn't you take him?" "Because he'll tell the others," Calder said grimly. "And they'll bring more." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the mountain wind cutting across their faces. Then Alara spoke, her voice iron. "Then we make ready. If they come again, we end it." The days that followed were no longer quiet. They set traps, scouted the ridges, prepared every corner of the cabin for siege. Calder could feel the weight of his past pressing closer, but now it was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. At night, when the fire burned low, he would look at her across the firs, her hair loose, her face soft in the glow. And he would wonder if fate had led him here not to escape his ghosts, but to find her. The outlaws came again, but this time they came with fire. Flames roared against the night as torches arced through the air, setting the pines ablaze. The cabin shook with the force of their assault. Calder and Alara fought like lions, every shot, every strike a defiance against the darkness pressing in. Blood was spilled, Calder's shoulder torn by a bullet, Alara's arm cut by flying wood. But they stood, unbroken. One by one, the outlaws fell, until silence returned once more. When the last body lay still in the snow, Calder staggered back into the cabin, blood soaking his shirt. Alara was there, catching him, her hand steady though her eyes burned with unshed tears. "You should have left me," she whispered fiercely. He caught her gaze, voice rough. "I'd face 1,000 storms before I'd leave you." For the first time, her armor cracked fully. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath shaking. "Then don't leave. Not ever." The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. Outside, the mountain stood silent, its hunger sated for now. But inside, Calder and Alara had forged something the storm itself could not break. They had found in each other not just survival, but something far rarer. Something worth bleeding for, something worth staying for. And as dawn broke once more across the endless white, Calder knew he had not just escaped his past. He had found his future, in the arms of the mountain woman who had once ordered him into her bed, and who now held his heart like it had always been hers.